Hey, Fed heads, welcome back to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. I said episode there, and I got to mess something up. Tonight we're going to be smoking the La Aurora Preferidos. This is the double barrel aged version. So we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. Going to be pairing it with some other stuff that's been inside of a barrel for a little bit. So sit down, have a cigar, and we'll be right back. We're back. Episode 151 of Sharing Our Pairings. I was thinking when I typed the name, I thought maybe we should do like a Bacardi 151 pairing, and then I was like, no, that's that's just a bad idea. Like I just have no interest in that. But so we're just doing a normal pairing. So what we're pairing tonight, you've probably seen these around. You may never have smoked one. I know that until fairly recently, I had never smoked one. These are the La Aurora Preferidos. They come in these fancy tubes. They're really nice, like tubos, and they have these kind of iconic shaped cigars. And I forgot to do our little intro before I started talking about the cigar. I got too excited. I'm your host, Tripp. We're here broadcast live on Facebook, broadcast around the world on the Armed Forces Radio Network, and of course available at your leisure as a podcast or on YouTube. And I'm here with my co-host, Dennis. Dennis, how you doing tonight?
Good morning. Fantastic.
Good morning.
151, man. That's awesome.
I think it would have been really funny, but it just would have tasted bad, and I don't think it would have been that entertaining for more than a few minutes. It would have been entertaining for a few minutes, but yeah. Maybe someday we'll do a pairing like that. Maybe episode 1151.
That sounds good to me.
So we're smoking the La Aurora Preferidos. We're going to talk about the details in a couple minutes. But Dennis, what are your initial thoughts on this cigar? We kind of just lit it up here.
Man, the first thing that comes out for me is actually the smell of the cigar. It reminds me of when I was younger and before I got into tobacco and cigars. And when you would have an old guy or some guy, usually it would be an older gentleman, walking by with a cigar and had that very distinct aroma. This stands out on its own, aroma-wise, for me at least, and it reminds me of that.
I think you're right. It's got
that old leather kind of
leathery, chocolatey, and just smoky. But it's one of those things where when you smell it, you know it's a cigar.
Oh, definitely.
Not all cigars are like that. There are a lot of cigars that smell like cigarettes or.
Yeah, that's true.
Just smell different. And this one smells like that classic cigar smell. All right, so I'll talk about the details a little bit. So this is the Preferido size. Like I said, you've probably seen this size around. And it's got a really interesting history, specifically with La Aurora. I was talking last week. I went to an event a couple weekends ago for La Aurora, and he briefly talked about the Preferidos, which is this size. It says on every tubo, it says 1903 edition. That was the first time this size was introduced, and La Aurora pioneered this vitola. They created this double perfecto kind of, I don't know what to call it, like a Zeppelin shape torpedo.
It is pretty cool.
Perfecto, I mean. And then so when I first got into smoking cigars, I don't know, 13 years ago, somewhere in there, I wanted to smoke a cigar this shape. Strictly because I had seen it in cartoons and on TV. And when you think of a cigar as a kid, this is the shape you think of. And that may not be true anymore because, there aren't a lot of characters on TV smoking cigars anymore. But I remember when I was a kid, it was kind of it was a thing. And those cigars were based on La Aurora Preferidos. All those characters, in the cartoons and Groucho and stuff, in old movies, whenever you saw a cigar this shape, it was because they were smoking La Auroras, which is pretty cool.
A lot of history there.
Yeah, that's 115 years ago that this cigar shape was invented. And like we think of it as the cartoon shape, which is what Vincenzo just called it, the cartoon cigar shape. And it's really interesting to me that it came from La Aurora rather than being inspired by the cartoons. Like we always think of it as only existing in cartoons. So I didn't know that. I thought that was really interesting. The La Aurora Preferidos, like I said, they come in these tubos. They are on the pricey side of expensive, I would say. Right now, this particular blend, they have, I believe it's 7 different blends. It might only be 6. I think it's 7. But they've got a variety of blends. And each blend is a little bit different. They each have a different color tubo. And with some of the blends, they've come out with a Parejo version. So, like, I'm not sure what the MSRP on some of them are anymore. I know that back in my day, they were like $15 when I wanted to buy one, and they were too expensive. I think they're closer to 20 now. I know the MSRP on this guy's $22.50. So I think they're probably creeping up somewhere in the high teens, low 20s. The Parejo versions, which are the same blends, they're not aged in the aging room for as long, and they don't come in these fancy tubos, but they're about half the price. So like you're going to be paying between $8 and $9 for one of those. So if this sounds good to you, I'm sure eventually, if it doesn't happen this year, maybe next year, we'll see the barrel-aged version in those Parejos.
Oh, I'd love to.
I think they're trying to get those out.
I really dig these tubos, too. They're pretty cool.
Yeah. The problem I have with this shape is that I talk so much that my cigar goes out.
I'm afraid to smoke mine because I smoke so fast, so I thought, let me just leave it for a little bit.
I don't think they smoke super fast, at least not for me. Kevin Chambers wants to know if we can share a jailbait. I don't know if I've even had a jailbait. So those cigars come from the Cigar Federation store. We're part of Cigar Federation, but we don't do the store very much. That's all handled by the guys who run the store. So unfortunately, I can't get my hands on those either. I think I might have had one that somebody gave me at some point, but I don't know. So anyway, this cigar is, like we have said several times, the La Aurora Double Barrel Aged Preferido. So the wrapper on this is Ecuadorian Habano. The binder is Dominican Republic. The filler is Brazilian, Cameroon, and Dominican Republic. Now, they don't say exactly which leaves, but I'm guessing some of the fillers during the aging process or the fermentation process, they go into rum barrels of unspecified origin. So we don't know what brand that comes from. It could be the La Aurora rum, because I know they make their own rum that's available down there. But they haven't released any information on what they are. But the reason they're called double barrel aged is because some of the tobacco is aged, and then once they're rolled, they age for an additional period of time. I think I've heard that the Preferidos are aged for a year. I'm not sure if that applies here or if that's strictly aging room time. But they spend a period of time once they're rolled in the same rum barrels again. Evan Kirshner says that it's 151. They age it in 151. I feel like I would get a lot more flavor out of that. And also, I don't think I've ever had 151 except like at a bar in a cocktail or something. I don't know if it's even aged in barrels. I have no idea. It might be a white rum for all I know. But I think it's interesting that they actually do double age it. Like, you know, when you hear double barrel aged, you're not. I immediately am skeptical, and I'm like, oh, so
I'm the same.
aged 2 of the leaves instead of just 1 of them in barrels. So I think it's interesting that it got the additional aging. I'm not sure how much of that comes through. They also don't say how. First of all, they don't say how long they spend in the barrels, and second, they don't say how many times those barrels have been used. I know with some companies they spray the inside of the barrel down with a little bit of whatever the spirit was. Like if it's rum, they'll spray down with rum. If it's whiskey, they'll spray down with a little bit of whiskey, so that they're really pulling some of that out of the barrel, and then they'll only use them a certain amount of times. I'm not sure what they're doing here, but I don't get a lot of barrel influence from it. Like it's not as much as like the Pappy Van Winkle cigars that are barrel aged.
Yeah, it's very subtle.
I think it's not even as much as like the Davidoff ones, like the Winston Churchill Late Hour or the Nicaraguan barrel aged or American barrel aged from Camacho.
Camacho, yeah. Yeah, it's a very subtle flavor. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it barrel aged for me. I'm getting more of just a general kind of wood, a little bit more than a cedar. Maybe even you would probably call it like a richer cedar, darker cedar maybe.
Yeah, I see what you mean. There's like an oakiness to it. I feel like it does taste a little barrely. It doesn't taste rummy. You taste a little bit of that that woodsiness from the barrel. But we've been talking for a while and we haven't gotten into our pairings yet. So let's finish talking about this. This Vitola is 5x54. The MSRP is $22.50, and you can get 8 cigars for a cool $180 per box. But I mean, even just very briefly looking, I was easily finding them for like $18. So if they're really your thing, you can save a little bit of money. But you know, that's up to you. So I'm going to talk about my first pairing here. I might switch things around a little bit. I'm still deciding. Yeah, I'm going to switch things around just because of the proof. So I'm going to start off with a classic here around here, Zafra Master Reserve rum. It's aged 21 years in bourbon barrels, at least 21 years in bourbon barrels. Zafra is distilled from molasses in Panama and aged, like I said, in bourbon barrels for 21 years. The master blender is a guy named Francisco Don Pancho Fernandez, and he was a master blender for a Cuban rum company that they don't specify. But I mean, there's really only like 5 or 6 Cuban rum companies total.
You can probably guess.
I mean, there's probably really 3 or 4 that some of them have several brands under them. I would guess that it's the one that you're drinking from tonight, just because they're the big one.
Yeah, probably.
And Kevin Chambers wants to know how long this cigar lasts. I'm not sure. It seems like a short little cigar. Like it really feels like diminutive in your hand. Like it does not feel like a big cigar.
I was joking. For me, 15 minutes, but I smoke really fast.
I mean, I would guess this probably for me would last about an hour, maybe a little more. But it wouldn't.
Yeah, I think an hour range.
But like I could get an hour and a half or sometimes 2 hours out of a Robusto. Because except when I'm doing this show, I'm a slow smoker, because when I'm doing the show, I'm focusing on talking, and then I have to keep my cigar lit, and you know, it's a whole dance. And Vincenzo Scarduzio says that Zeno Platinum Scepter Chubby is a similar size, and yeah, I've had that before. That is a similar size, but I think it's really interesting that, like, when I first started smoking, I would have thought that La Aurora knocked off Zeno, but it turns out Zeno knocked off La Aurora, which is it's crazy how influential this Vitola was. So I'm going to finish talking about my Zafra because I interrupted myself with Vincenzo's question there. This clocks in at 40% ABV. It's right around $45 or $50 a bottle, which seems crazy reasonable to me for a 21-year-old.
Very, very reasonable.
Like, I don't know if you could get maple syrup that spent 21 years in a barrel for that much. It seems just too reasonable for a 21-year. But, you know, rum they have a different aging process than like bourbon or scotch, where they end up reusing barrels several more times for the most part. All right, I'm going to let you talk about your first pairing while I take a couple sippies of my Zafra here.
Man, I'm just about actually done with my done drinking my first pairing. It's so good, and I love this stuff. I'm obsessed with this stuff. My first pairing of the night is Havana Club Selección de Maestros, which I picked up when I was in Cuba, and man, it's super affordable. $40 for the bottle. You know, anywhere outside the U.S., about $40 for the bottle. That's a great deal for what it is. And it's kind of cool. So Havana Club itself, a lot of people have heard of it. A lot of people know about it. Even if you live in the U.S. and you've seen sort of some Havana Club stuff, I know it gets a little bit tricky with Bacardi.
Yeah, Yeah, within the last couple of
It's a
years,
little bit of
Bacardi has
confusion.
relaunched it. They've had the trademark for a long time, but they kind of just canned the brand
Yeah.
for decades. It wasn't around. And I think in 2015, 2016, it came out again.
Yeah, and they actually had a really big rivalry for a long time. A lot of contention, litigation going on between the two companies about sort of the ownership of the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so Havana Club goes back to 1934, and this particular one is really special because it's triple barrel aged. They have this guild down in Cuba called the Guild of Maestros Roneros de Cuba, which is basically the rum masters of Cuba. And these guys meet, effectively they meet 3 times. It'll go through the regular process, the standard rum process into the barrel. Then they'll come back, they'll do a selection and a tasting, rebarrel it, do that again, and the final barreling is in white oak barrels, which I think is really cool, very interesting. And then even after that, there's still one more kind of final selection of, what's going to be the rum for this year. And they do a final blend.
Do you know what the approximate age is on that? Because I want to talk about what I think happens a little bit.
I wish there was no info on age, and pretty sure they do it on purpose.
Yeah.
But it is a blend of many different ages.
So my guess is that I actually have a bottle sitting right here. My guess is that the 7 is the second barreling. So this is kind of like what they do with Lafroig.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's kind of exactly what they do with Lafroig for triple wood. So what they do, they age it for 10 years. I'm talking about Lafroig now, not Havana Club. Then they do a selection where they say, okay, these are the best. I don't know what their ratios are, but let's say these are the best 10 barrels out of these 100. This is the top 10%. And then they vat all that together, and it goes into another set of barrels. And the rest gets bottled as 10-year. Then they take after that barrel aging is done, they take the whiskey out of those barrels. They do another, or actually before they take it out, they do a selection, and they say, all right, out of those 10 barrels, these are the best 2. And then they put those 2 into an additional barrel and bottle the rest. So I think that's probably the same thing that's happening here. I think they're probably doing like the 2-year or the 3-year, and then they do a selection for what they think has the best aging potential. Then they do a selection for 7 years, and then they probably do another selection somewhere around like the 12-year mark, I would guess, which is what turns into the selection to Maestros.
Yeah, likely. It's a pretty cool combination, and this clocks in at 45%. And the bottle that I'm drinking tonight is from 2017, so it's their 2017 release. And one thing, actually funny, we always talk about this, we bring it up at least, talking about rum. We talk about the difference between industrial and agricultural rum, the two kind of big types. And I kind of finally figured it out. It's always sort of eluded me.
Yeah.
There's been some confusion.
It's kind of confusing. I know that what I'm drinking here, the Zafra, is an industrial rum. But if you want to talk about the difference, go right ahead. I won't review.
Yeah. So agricultural rum and industrial rum. Agricultural is essentially they do a sugar solution for the fermentation from fresh sugarcane juice. Effectively, what happens with this is once it goes through the fermentation, distillation, and the aging process, what you end up getting is a product that is really variable from place to place and also to crop. So depending on the quality of the crop yield, you will get a different product. Whereas industrial is molasses and water, which gives them a more consistent final product. The only difference really being kind of the shape of the distillation columns and some of the aging practices that they use.
Yeah, and there's definitely a difference in complexity.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It reminds me a lot like the difference between, if you're a whiskey guy, it reminds me of the difference between like a grain whiskey and a malt whiskey for Scotch.
Oh yeah.
So like for a malt whiskey, you're getting a lot of complexity from those malts, and that's part of what gives it the character that it has. For a grain whiskey, you're really getting more character from the barrel than you are from the malts or from the spirit itself. And I find rum to be kind of the same way, where agricultural, which is the pressed cane sugar, tends to be a little bit more complex, and you get a little more like bite from the spirit and a little bit more
Yeah.
from it. And then industrial rum, I lost the word for a second there, tends to be a little sweeter and not have as many notes from the spirit itself.
And Havana Club is a really interesting rum. Generally, I've never been a rum guy, and having Florida Caña, I was totally converted to certain types of rum. Florida Caña being one of them, and Havana Club being the other one. Because it's a very different, it's not your typical rum flavor. There's this really interesting kind of bitterness on the back end that's very classic of Cuban rum.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing about that, you mentioned Florida Caña. A really big difference between Florida Caña and Havana Club is Havana Club's got that like distinct bitterness.
Yeah.
And then Florida Caña is different from most rums, where it's got like this spiciness to it.
That's right.
Most other rums don't really have. And that's I've found the same thing where like I just wasn't really into rum for a while, and I found that the more interesting rums that aren't as like typical rum like, I really like. This Zafra, for example, it's very rum like, but you get a ton of bourbon influence because it sits in those bourbon barrels for at least 21 years.
It's a long time to wait.
Man. It really is.
I could not wait that long.
I think the sweetness, though, is a little much for this cigar. How do you find the selection of Maestros go?
Oh, man, the bitterness is so fantastic because it's almost like a bitter chocolate with the cigar. Mm-hmm. It just tastes like a block of bitter chocolate, and I love that.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away from the cigar at all, and the rum stands up very nicely by itself.
And I missed our first break here. I got to talking and forgot about it. But this segment is brought to you by the Cigar Federation store. Go to store.cigarfederation.com. They got some Warp stuff in this week. I got another email from them. I think they did another one of those SigFed tobacco cigars recently. If you haven't already, go pick up some Grimalkins. That is a classic Emilio cigar that was fantastic, that was made at my father. And they're gone for years. And they just brought them back with Black Label Trading Company, so they're making them at the Oveja Negra factory. And James told me they're actually the same blend, and they turned out awesome in my opinion. It's interesting because it's apparently the exact same blend, but it's got so much of that like signature Black Label flavor, while the original version had so much of that Don Pepin signature like spice. I find it really interesting. I wish that I still had an original release that I could taste them side by side. So go to the store.cigarfederation.com, pick some up. And if you're not already, join cigarfederation.com for a 10% discount on everything from the store. Jeremy Miller says he strayed from rum to up his whiskey game. I mean, that's basically the story of my life, man. Like, I buy rum once in a while, but I usually buy rums that I'm more familiar with. I have discovered a couple, like that Brugal 1888 that I used to have on the show all the time that I polished off a couple months ago. That one I was really surprised by. But for the most part, for me, I buy a rum and then I'm like, I guess that's okay. And then I mix it with Coke.
You know, it's funny. I'll probably get crucified for saying this, but the Havana Club Union, which is kind of their like top tier, top shelf. It's a rum designed specifically for pairing with cigars. It was too sweet for me. It didn't do it for me, you know? I know a lot of people love it. It's not a bad rum.
I thought you were going to say you mixed it with Coke.
No.
I was going to say that's not that
I could
bad.
never do it.
I mean, so in Nicaragua, I was at a bar and we ordered the shout out to Skip Martin for paying. We ordered the Florida Caña 25, and the guy brought Coke.
Oh yes.
He brought bottles of Coca-Cola to everybody and filled our cups up with ice, and it was like, no, we don't need that, because that's just how they do it down there. Even if you're balling, you go to the club and you get bottle service with Florida Caña 25. You're spending $300 a bottle or $250 a bottle or whatever, and you sip it with some Coke.
Which, for reference, I mean, for that bottle, honestly, that's a cheap price in a club.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine what most people pay in the U.S. for clubs, right? You get a $50 bottle of vodka will cost you $2.50.
Well, the clubs are a little different too. The club seems a
scene.
little bit different down
very
there.
Different.
All right, so I'm going to move on to my Elijah Craig. This is my second pairing, Elijah Craig Small Batch, one of my favorites. This particular bottle is a little bit special because it's got that little S on there. This was selected specifically for Saints and Sinners, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a private club that you probably won't be able to get into. I'm sorry. You have to be invited these days. It used to be like a free open registration where anybody could get in as long as you had good timing. But now it's only open to invitations. But they started doing a couple of years ago these private selection whiskeys, which is pretty cool. And this is the only one that I've been able to get in on.
They've
done some insane ones. Like, I mean, this is just Elijah Craig, so I wasn't surprised that this one didn't sell out immediately. But they did an Eagle Rare selection, they did a Buffalo Trace, and they did a Willet, which is like, and it was Willet 5-year bourbon, which is not easy stuff to get. But, you know, this is one of the perks of being in the club is that you get access to this kind of stuff. And just because you're in there, it doesn't mean you're going to get it because it's
so hard. There's so many members, too.
Button. To talk a little bit about Elijah Craig, let me find my notes here. It's sometimes Elijah Craig, the man, is sometimes credited as the creator of bourbon. They say that he first discovered the practice of charring barrels and then aging your spirit in them. Before then, people would make moonshine. They would put it in a barrel to transport it. But it wasn't, you know, it was the story is that he noticed that it took on some of the wood flavors and it, you know, turned a little bit brown. And then he decided to burn the inside of one of his barrels to find out what would happen, and it turned out amazing. There is a lot of contention to whether or not this is true. I read in some places, I think he was a teetotaler who never drank, which it wouldn't be that crazy because Johnny Walker actually was too. Johnny Walker never had a sip of whiskey in his life. So it wouldn't surprise me that much. But, you know, nobody really knows whether he actually created the process of charring barrels or not. It's distilled by Heaven Hill. It used to be a 12-year bourbon, but they in the last couple of years, they've taken the age statement off. I mean, everybody can assume it's because they didn't have enough product to keep up with demand because of the bourbon lull in the 90s and the early 2000s when bourbon just wasn't as popular. So companies started ramping down production, and now they're paying the price by not having enough product to keep up with demand. We do know the mash bill is the Heaven Hill mash bill, 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. I believe all Elijah Craig small batches are bottled at 47%, which is interesting because typically when you get a single barrel selection, a lot of times they don't water it down. So this is single barrel, but it is watered down for bottling. And they say, I don't think it says on the label here, but I know that it said on the website that it's between 8 and 12 years old. And they even put on the label there, Father of Bourbon. If it'll focus. There we go.
I love that label. It's simple and it's classy. The bottle looks nice.
I kind of prefer the old label. I liked the old Elijah Craig bottles that were like a little more rounded.
Yeah.
Just a little more like a Crown Royal bottle kind of. They're just a little fancier. But I do kind of like how understated this one is. Like it's just nice and classic. So I'm gonna take a couple sips of this while you talk about whatever that is you're taking a sip of already.
Oh, good Lord. I'm almost done with it, actually. I've been sipping on it. My next pairing is kind of funky like many of mine, but this one was a gift from a friend of mine who recently traveled to Mexico and found a microbrewery out there. And he thought, hey, let me bring this guy a beer. See if he likes it. So first time hearing about these guys, first time trying it. Really interesting stuff. So I'm going to butcher the names, but bear with me on this. So the brewery is called Reliquia de Cortez, and the beer is called Carabellas American Amber or Red Ale. I'm assuming that means that it's the relic of Cortez, probably. In doing some research, I actually found their website is down for construction, which was not a good sign for me. But it is an American amber ale, and it comes in at 7.7%. Absolutely, almost no information on it. The only information was actually just references to the Spanish conquest after 1519 and kind of the spice trade that happened, and that was about it. It was kind of weird. But if you look at the color, let me just switch my camera. It's kind of what you would expect, although the thing that I would say is, and I guess you can't really tell because of the lighting, but this thing is it's like champagne. The bubbles are so fine. It's very strange.
You can kind of see it in the head a little bit.
Yeah, it comes out a little bit in the head, and it may have been sitting for a while too. As soon as I poured it, the last little bit had all that goodness on the bottom. Usually goodness, but for an amber, it's kind of a weird kind of thing going on.
A sign that it was definitely unfiltered, possibly what's the word?
Bottle aged?
Yeah, possibly bottle aged, where they leave it kind of alive so that the yeast is still in there active.
But I'm impressed by the fact that, it seems like these guys are really, really small. Maybe they recently started or their production is not very big, but they're really trying to push craft breweries out there, and I think it's awesome when I see craft breweries in other countries. It's kind of an interesting take because a lot of times they'll take very popular styles from America or from Europe, and they'll try to put their own twist on these different styles. So the only thing I wanted to say for those of you that don't know, amber ales, red ales, kind of what is that, right? Like, what does that even mean? We've seen all of that in the stores, the macro brews they'll say, oh, this is an American amber. Generally, and it's kind of a catch-all thing, but generally ambers are less than a dark ale in color, so to speak, and they focus more on the malts. If you look at something like an Irish red versus an American red or an American amber, the difference is the U.S. version is more hop-based. The Irish and the Flemish versions are more malt, and in the case of Flemish, it's more focused on the yeast and the bacteria, so lacto or whatever else they like to put in. But I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's a little sour. It's really bitey from the bubbles, and it's got this sourness to it that I can't place, and it's not like a sour beer sour.
There's a weird world that we live in now where sometimes if a beer is like bad, you can't tell if it's bad or if it's supposed to be that way.
Right? It's there are other conversations that can be had with that, but I'll just leave it at yes. I agree.
What do you think of the cigar at this point? I think it's a lot milder than I was expecting.
It ramped down for me as well, so much. It's still, I'm getting sweetness, but a lot of that woody punch that I had at the beginning really just went down, almost away, I would say. But it still has a nice sweetness. It's a very subtle, almost like maybe like a nutty kind of sweetness.
It reminds me of I don't know, like a cake donut, like that level of sweetness, where it's not like super sweet, but it's not sweet. Yeah,
it's definitely not cloying. It still smells great, which is awesome. And mine has been smoking really well and holding up to my crazy pace, so that's good. It's always a good sign.
Yeah. And Jeremy Miller says, if you join the Heaven Hill Club, about once a year you can customize a label and put it on a bottle that says what you want to commemorate an
event pretty cool.
Or as a gift. Does that mean, Jeremy, that it's like one of these things? Like they send you one of these stickers that you stick on a bottle? Or do they actually like put a label on a bottle and sell it to you? I'm not sure. Vincenzo Scarduzio says his pairing tonight is a Davidoff Millennium Blend with Glendronach 15-year Revival. That sounds like my kind of pairing, dude.
Oh, yes.
That's good stuff. Very good. Sorry, I'm desperately trying to keep my cigar from going out here. I'm going to take a couple more sips of my Elijah Craig and see. Like, Elijah Craig is just such a solid bourbon.
I've never had a bad experience with Elijah Craig. That's always on my list of, easily top 10 list of bourbons.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. It's got like that, what is the word? It's like almost a fruity sweetness on the nose. And there's definitely like, you get some oakiness on the nose, but then when you taste it, there's this, it's one of those bourbons where you can actually kind of taste corn a little bit. Like, it's not super intense, it's not super noticeable, but if you think about it, you can notice like a little bit of like an unsalted corn chip kind of flavor. Huh. Like, it's a little bit bitter, and it's got like that little bit of sweetness. And then of course there's the typical like vanilla, oaky, slightly smoky kind of bourbon note.
Which is always so amazing.
Yeah, I think like, and I forgot to mention the price. Like, I think I paid $33 after shipping for this. Just because.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah, I mean that's like $10 more than I would normally pay for this bottle. And I think shipping was about $8 or something. So it's not like you're not paying an arm and a leg for this. But what you're getting is just so good. And I mean, a lot of people think the quality's gone down a lot since they took the 12-year age statement off. Personally, I think it's a notch below, but not by a lot. It's barely noticeable to me. I was looking at some of the comments. Chico Ray says his pairing tonight is an AJ Fernandez Monte Cristo with an IBC cream soda. I feel like cream soda goes really well with cigars. Yeah. Cream soda is kind of one of those pairings that we talk about, kind of like root beer and coffee, where the base notes are going to pair with almost every cigar out there. The only thing that's going to be different, like if we did a cream soda show, the only thing to talk about would be the nuances that different cream sodas have that others don't. And Jeremy Miller says he's got the same style Elijah Craig bottle, but he's got a Rocky Mountain Cigar Fest on it. That's pretty cool. So like that's cool that you can like make those labels yourself, and kind of you can make a normal bottle into a special bottle, which I like. Once again, trying to keep my cigar from going out. All right, my final pairing of the night. We'll go back through. We'll talk about our pairings a little bit more in a few minutes, but I wanted to get it moving. So my final pairing is a highly acclaimed beer, as the label very clearly states, which I feel like is a little weird.
Very acclaimed.
Yeah, it's just weird that it says it there. That's strange to me. This is KBS from Founders Brewing in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I almost said Grand Rapids. Founders was started in 1997 by Mike Stevens and Dave Engbers. It's one of those kind of cool stories where they weren't like brewers from another brewery or something like that. They had day jobs, and they were just like, why don't we start a brewery? And then quit their day jobs and got loans and started a brewery.
I feel like that's the thing. Everyone's doing that today, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty common story, but it doesn't always work out. And they did have,
it's not
in
easy,
the early days,
sure.
They had several times where they almost went under. In 2001, they decided to try barrel aging. I think they said, I read the story and I didn't put it in my notes. They had a barrel from somewhere, and they just figured, why not toss some of our breakfast stout in it? This was 2001, and they ended up liking the results. They ended up playing with that a little bit. In 2003, they released the first version of Kentucky Breakfast Stout, on in their tap house at the brewery. Since then, as everybody probably knows, it's just gotten more and more popular. I think it was 2006, they had to change the name because you're not really allowed to say that it's from Kentucky if it's not. So they're obviously in Michigan, so they had to change the name to KBS. So people still know it as Kentucky Breakfast Stout, even though legally they're only allowed to call it KBS. One other interesting thing that I want to mention is, because there's just not a lot of other information on this, and I'll talk about the beer itself, but there's not a lot more backstory to it. But one of the really interesting things is part of their barrel aging program, they actually age some of their barrels underground in an old gypsum mine that's nearby.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's weird.
They say it's about 60 to 80 feet underground, which is pretty cool. So, like I said, this is KBS. They call it a flavored stout, which I've always found strange.
Probably another legal thing too, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just not sure where the flavored part comes from, because it's not, as far as I know, it doesn't have flavor added to it. It's a stout that is brewed in oak barrels, bourbon barrels, with coffee and chocolate mixed in. And I thought that you didn't have to call it flavored unless you added flavoring to it. So I'm just not sure why they would say that if it's not for a legal point. But whatever. It's a imperial stout. Every batch has a slightly different ABV. That's part of that is that I don't know how strict they are with the recipe. It could be slightly different. They may be using some yeast that is a little bit finicky. That certain yeast strains you can't predict the exact amount of alcohol because it can differ a little bit. But I suspect most of that is because they're using freshly used bourbon barrels, and you end up getting some of not just bourbon flavor, but you actually end up with bourbon in there that pumps up the ABV a little bit. This particular batch was bottled on March 12th, and it is 12.3% alcohol by volume. This is a 2018 release. A really interesting thing, I never thought I would see this beer I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was on Christmas. It was either on Christmas or on Easter. Easter sounds more like it because that was kind of in the middle of the season. But my local beer store posted that they got 6 cases on a holiday when everybody's, at their in-laws' house or whatever, or, together with family. And they got 6 cases and they sold out within an hour. And I was walking around the grocery store last week.
Oh, that's right. You told me about that.
And there was just a stack of them. I stopped and I was like, at first, my brain at first was like, no, don't. It's just like Anderson Valley's bourbon barrel stout or something. They just have similar packaging. And then I was like, no, that's KBS. And then I picked it up and I was like, are they mass producing it now? And I don't know. I don't understand. I think what it must be is that the grocery stores just, they have their own distributor probably that ends up bringing in a bunch of beer and then they just split it up evenly within all the stores. And because they're not a specialty shop, people don't come in looking for it on release day.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They don't release it until a couple weeks later. So that's my best guess on what happened. It was the same price you're going to pay anywhere else. It was $24 for a 4-pack.
That's not bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's the kind of price that I have a hard time paying, but it's kind of like if a 4-pack of cigars is $50. You're only 4 cigars and it's $50 or something like that, and it's I guess I do pay the same amount for different quantities. I have this bottle sitting here, this Freem. I think this was about $9 for 16 ounces, which is more expensive than 4 bottles, $24. So, I mean, it kind of balances itself out to me. It's not the kind of beer you're going to buy and bring to a barbecue. At least unless you've got a ton of extra money. But it's not the kind of thing I'd bring to a barbecue. I bring like a $10 6-pack to a barbecue. And it's crazy because $10 used to be a lot for a 6-pack.
Yeah, I remember that. It's crazy.
I think that's where like the mental block is for people who are like, I'm not paying $20 for 4 beers. And
that's like the standard now.
Yeah, exactly. And like I don't bat an eye at $10 for a 22-ounce beer. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's just like a mental thing. I think it's like sticker shock. Just seeing the price for 4 of them at the same time seems like a lot. But if you charge me $6 for this one bottle, I'd feel like I was getting a great deal.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of places they're allowing you to actually break up those 6-packs and the 4-packs, and you can do singles and pay the regular price and not have to pay anything extra.
Yeah, that's a good thing about not that particular grocery store, but one of the other grocery stores that's right down the street. Like they basically check in every beer as a 6-pack or 4-pack or 12-pack or whatever it comes in, and then they also inventory it as a single. So like, I always feel weird, like I don't want to just break it open and take one. So I always ask the beer person. But
yeah, I do the same.
They've never had a problem with me just being like, I only want one of those, and then they're just like, okay, sure, here you go. So I'm gonna take a couple sips of this and see how it is with this double barrel aged.
My last pairing of the night. It's an imperial stout, and I'm kind of just a little bit lost in thought about how I feel about it and what the flavor is like. I've had it before, and I kind of put it down for a little bit, and I bought a 6-pack and I let it sit for a little bit. And I'll show you what it is. My last beer is from Mother Earth Brewing Company. It's called Syntax, and I think this is actually a beer that you've had on the show maybe before, or you talked about it.
I've had it at least once, and I believe John had it on the show. I don't remember if he had it on the show if it was, or if he had it on his own. And I just remember seeing it on Untappd.
So this one is it's an Imperial Peanut Butter Stout. Comes in at 8.1% alcohol, and
which I mean, I want to stop you there.
It's kind of low.
8.1 isn't that imperial.
No,
it's like
not at all.
Imperial session stout.
That's like a regular stout. It's a breakfast stout,
like
basically.
It's 0.1% higher than a regular stout.
Yeah. And this comes in from Mother Earth Brewing Company, which is based out of Vista, California, though they actually have a tap room and a brew house just outside of Boise, Idaho. It's kind of cool.
Oh.
And they've definitely expanded. They were only founded back in 2010, but since then they've expanded a lot, and their operation has grown. They've released a lot of different beers, a lot of different kind of some regular styles, classic styles, and some kind of funky beers like this one. And this one is a little bit more special because it's actually made with brown sugar, so it gets that sort of molasses fullness to it. And the thing that I found really interesting, maybe a little bit weird with this beer, and it does come out in the flavor, maybe not necessarily in a bad way, but it's noticeable, is that the hops that they used for it were actually really high alpha acid bittering hops. So Columbus, Tomahawk, and Zeus, which generally give you this like really intense, almost like an herbal licorice type flavor. A lot of spice, a lot of black pepper, kind of subdued citrus notes. It's a very intense hop, and I'm surprised that they used it for a kind of a sweet stout. So maybe that's what it was. They wanted to cut the sweetness a little bit. But I don't know. But it is my thing with stouts, and I think I'm jaded by so many great beers that I've had. Now when I pick up a stout and it's not really thick and creamy and has a solid body, I complain about it, which is crazy because it doesn't necessarily make it a bad beer, right?
No, I completely agree. I found that particular stout, I don't want to, take over your tasting notes, but I found it to be like really thin, like super thin. Like
that was my only issue with it.
Thin. Like it was really flavorful, but it was thin.
This is like a dark Pilsner for me.
So for what I did with that, like I remember the last time I had it on the show, because the first time I had it, I was like, that's just like in your mouth, it feels like it's a Pilsner or something like that. Like it's got those
licorice Pilsner,
those
that's
small bubbles. Like. It's got that thinness where it doesn't really coat your tongue at all. So what I found is like shaking up the can and just doing like the nitro dump into the glass really worked. And then I think the second time I had it on the show, I got the can out and opened it and poured it like 2 hours before the show. So it would be almost flat and totally room temperature by the time the show got here. And I felt like that worked really well. But it's weird that you would have to do that with a stout to me.
Definitely. I mean, the stout market is massive right now. And it's funny how jaded we all are, right? Because we have so many options. We have so many great beers out there that we pick up a beer and maybe it's not a bad beer, but we immediately go to, well, it's too thin. It's got the bubbles are too big or too small.
Actually, now that I think about it, that's what it was. It had soda-style bubbles. Like big fat bubbles.
Yeah. It's really just carbon dioxide rich.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird thing for a stout. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it could come from the fact that I don't know how long that beer has been around. It's possible that they've been brewing it and it ends up taking on more carbon dioxide than they expect, because that's a thing that happens. Maybe they just didn't do enough testing before canning, and they thought some of that was going to work its way out and it ended up not doing it or something like that. Before I forget, we have to take our last break to thank our good friends over at Drew Estate. They good. What cigar do we want to highlight from Drew Estate today, Dennis?
I'm going to go back to my old classic. I was going to say Norteño, but lately I've been on this T52 kick, and dude, I love those cigars, and the fact that they're in tins kills me. It's cheap. They're a great quick smoke. I mean, for me, I smoke it in about 5 minutes, but regular people will smoke it in about maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah,
25, 30
minutes. About how much I get out of those.
But they're tasty, and they're tasty small, and they're tasty big, and I've had so many different Vitolas, and consistently I always go back to that cigar, and that's the cigar that I always keep. So,
agreed.
That's my
go
jam.
Get yourself some T52s. So I'm drinking this KBS. Like I said, for me, this was one of like my unicorn beers where I didn't think I was ever really going to get it until last August, I think. We had 0% distribution for Founders here.
Wow.
We couldn't get any Founders beer whatsoever. Then in August, I think it was August. It might have been a little earlier than that last year. But it's still a very recent addition to our beers here. So people were clamoring for KBS when it first came out here. And they actually had a thing. I tried to go to it, and I ended up like, I don't remember what ended up happening, but I ended up not making it. They had a launch event for releasing the beer in Oregon, and they had KBS there because they had held back some of the 2017 release for these release parties. And I ended up not making it to that for some reason. I don't know. But since then, I've had a couple of their beers. I've had their, I think it's Backwoods Bastard is the other barrel-aged, the barrel-aged Scotch Ale, which I thought was
it's insane.
Really
it's so good.
So the weird thing about this, let me take another sip to confirm. It's really weird because it starts off feeling really thin. And then it's like I'm trying to figure out a way to explain this. It starts off feeling really thin on your mouth, on your palate, on your tongue, and then suddenly like it explodes with flavor. And it still is like for a 12.9% barrel age, it's kind of lacking in that like viscous motor oily quality. Like you can kind of see it's got some lacing on the head, but it's just not really like thick. Like it doesn't really stick to the sides. It doesn't have that motor oil quality that I look for, but it's got the flavor of a beer like that, which is really weird. Like it's got so much coffee and so much bitter chocolate, and you get a lot of that bourbon flavor out of it.
It carries it so well.
Yeah, like it's weird because the first time I took a sip, it was like I don't know if this lives up to the hype. And then it's just got so much flavor. It's crazy. I gotta get to some of these comments. Chico Ray says that. Well, first of all, he says the Preferido Ruby Maduro is really good. I love that one. I think that's. I don't remember what the wrapper is on that one. It's not the broadleaf. The broadleaf is the black, or onyx or whatever they call it. But that ruby is really good. He also says Cigar City Brewing carries a few stouts that are $30 and up. I mean, that's not unheard of. Like we were talking about before the show, that Dennis thought about picking up some Eclipse, which is about $70 a bottle.
Well, this particular one was, I forget what the varietal of it was.
Which isn't, like, at a bar markup, that's not insane. Like,
no, not at all.
Like, I've seen it around here for as low as, like, $25 a bottle. But then for variants, you're looking at $35, $50. It's not crazy. I bought a 12-ounce can of a Modern Times beer a few weeks ago that was $16.50. And they've got 22-ounce bombers that are like $32, $35, which, you know, when you're barrel aging a beer, when you're making a really high-gravity stout, it takes a lot of resources to make a stout that heavy. You know, you've got to back it up with a lot of hops, which hops are generally the most expensive portion of a beer.
And most volatile, really, over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They do not last long at all. And then the barrel aging part, you're sitting on that product for months, if not years, before you can make any money off of it. And then there's the demand aspect. I mean, it makes sense that beers are that expensive. The problem is when you only are seeing it in a 4-pack. That's where the sticker shock comes in. Yeah. Like, if it was one 48-ounce bottle that was $25, I'd be like, of course. But when it's 4 12-ounce bottles, I'm like, I don't know about that. Jeremy Miller says that he's just getting Cigar City in his area and hasn't tried it yet. Grab their High Ally. I think that's a really good IPA.
High Ally, White Oak. They do a limited release. White Oak is insane, and it's killer. It's really good.
That's actually a funny thing about that beer is that before Dennis and I knew each other, I mean, we've talked about this before. Before we knew each other, we did a trade on Reddit, and then we knew each other for 2 years. Or no, I guess we knew each other for about a year before we realized that trade was between us. But I still remember High Ally White Oak was one of those, and I was blown away. Yeah. And it's, I don't know how long it spends with the White Oak, but it's like, I don't know if it's barrel aged or spiral aged or what, but it's good. It's like, you know, it's an IPA that's got a little bit of that woodiness. It's just smoothed out a little bit. It's really good.
Speaking of woodiness, how's the cigar going for you? What do you think?
I get a lot of wood. I get a little bit of sweetness on the palate. And then on the retrohale, I get a little bit of spice. My palate's a little jacked up right now, which is why I haven't been like giving as many tasting notes as I normally do, because my allergies are just awful. Like, I don't know if you could tell, my eyes are like swelling shut right now. But I can still taste it enough that I know that I like it.
I'm getting this almost like a green wood flavor, like the smell of freshly cut green wood.
There's like a bitterness to it that I'm trying to figure out, and green wood is the right way to put it, like freshly cut oak. And I don't know where that would come from. I do think, unfortunately, KBS is a little too strong for this cigar. The cigar doesn't have as much body as I was expecting it to. It's kind of more of a medium plus than it is a medium full.
Definitely. And for me, I personally, I would say for me, it's even just a medium. Really.
Yeah. For the most part, yeah. I think it is kind of just a solid medium. but I like it. I feel like we went a little too intense on the pairings tonight.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, 100% agreed on that.
I think I got too excited by the barrel aging. I think I should have gone with like a Speyside or a Highland Scotch.
Oh yeah.
That's a little more sweet, a little more light. Like the KBS is just all wrong for this pairing. I think if it was like barrel aged and it had a broadleaf wrapper, I think that it would actually work really well. But you know, I like to get squirrely with my pairings. I prefer to, like, typically what I'll do is I'll pick out my pairings before I familiarize myself with the blend of the cigar. Because obviously I want to have the details so I can talk about the cigar intelligently, but I don't want to know which pairing is going to be the best. So
I kind of like to do the same thing.
Just really quickly.
For me, I think going back to my pairings, I have an easy winner, which is going to be Havana Club, because it was start to finish really consistent, paired really well with the cigar, and didn't overpower the cigar, which was the biggest thing. The other two beers, you know, they may have been good on their own, but they just took away from a lot of the flavor of the cigar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the similar pairing that I'm having. Elijah Craig is amazing on its own. I think with this cigar, it's just got a little too much character for this cigar. The Zafra goes pretty well with it because it's got that like intense sweetness with a little bit of that bourbon character, but it's really more about the sweetness. And it's kind of Zafra reminds me a lot of a really softened bourbon. It's like a softened bourbon with a little extra sweetness. It reminds me a little bit of like having an old fashioned, where you're rounding out all the harsh edges of that bourbon. And that's kind of what Zafra reminds me of, because you get the bourbon character from it spending time in those barrels, but it's not as intense as most bourbons are. And I think that a bourbon is just too intense for this cigar. So we're going to close out our Armed Forces Radio Network segment. Thank you, everybody out there, for, you know, doing things that we're not built to do and protecting our freedoms. Memorial Day was this past weekend. We were thinking of you guys. Thank you all for your service. We can't express how much we appreciate you guys out there, you know, protecting us and fighting for the American way. So everybody have a great and safe weekend. We hope you get a little bit of time to smoke a cigar, listen to the show, and just relax a little bit. And we'll talk to you tomorrow night or next week, depending on your scheduling of the show. All right, so now we're going to do our After Dark segment, because I got a little bit of cigar left, and I feel like there's still stuff to talk about as far as the pairings go.
I actually wanted to go back to an interesting point that I think a lot of people kind of hear about, but not a lot of people talk about, which is that really the difference between an ale and a lager. And I think there's some contention and some confusion, and it's a weird thing. There's a lot going on. And, you know, my second pairing of the night was an American Amber / like a red ale. But why wasn't it a red lager? Right? It could have been, technically, it could have been a red lager.
Could have been.
But there's some kind of big distinctions here for ales and lagers. Basically, what you're really looking at from a kind of a beer nerd perspective, you're really looking at the yeast. The yeast is kind of going to drive yeast drives in beer. Yeast drives a lot of the flavor, and people overlook yeast because people are busy these days talking about, you know, the IPAs and the hops, and people kind of have forgotten about malts. Technically, malts really come out more in your stouts and your darker beers, a bit. But ale yeast and lager yeast is kind of a weird thing, you know. Ale yeast is what's known as top fermenting yeast. So when you dump it in, it starts to do its thing. It will rise to the top. Eventually, it'll settle to the bottom like all yeast does.
So when you're brewing beer, you'll see, like, you can't see it at a production brewery because they've generally got stainless steel.
Yep.
But if you're a home brewer, ale yeast is when it's sitting on the top. You get that like thick foam on the top. That's where all the action's going on. The yeast is up on the top, eating all the sugar, turning it into alcohol and gases.
Yeah. And ale yeast actually are generally brewed at a higher temperature.
Yeah, between 60 and 75 degrees, I think, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I homebrewed.
Yeah, same here. It's been a while. And, you know, at the inverse of that, you have lager yeast, which is bottom fermenting. And lager yeast is a lot more hardened to the cold. So a lot of times you'll have a lager that's fermented at a much lower temperature than most beers.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of anybody who's brewing lager. That's like where the Coors gets their cold as the Rockies thing. Lagers need to be chilled, like under 45 degrees, I think, is generally where it is.
And most yeast is just not capable of surviving at that temperature.
Yeah, at those temperatures, most yeast isn't capable of surviving. My understanding is that generally lagers, I mean, like if you tasted a lager and an ale, you can tell the difference.
Yes.
An ale produces more, like, I don't know if you call it tannins, esters.
Yeah.
Where you end up with more of these, the word off flavors comes to mind, but they're not really.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
But they're flavors that give it more character. A lager yeast will generally just be a little bit more straightforward. It'll have a little bit less character. Like the way we were talking before about grain versus like industrial rum versus agricultural rum, grain whiskey versus malt whiskey. One method you end up with a cleaner version of it, and the other method you end up with one that's got a little bit more character. So like with a lager, you're usually gonna get more flavor from those hops, and anything else that you add to it. And with an ale, you're gonna get more flavors from those malts, and then kind of backfill those flavors with the hops.
And generally, you know, with lager yeast, you see a lot of beers with lower alcohol because it's not as hardened to alcohol as an ale yeast would be.
Yeah, that's true. There are lagers you can get, like an imperial lager. It's possible, but most companies are using yeasts that can't survive over, like, I don't know, 6% maybe ABV. Yeah. They die off pretty quick. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my cigar from going out here.
I'm surprised that my cigar lasted this long, actually.
It burns a little cooler and a little slower than you'd expect.
Yeah. Which is nice. I like that a lot.
Half my cigar did go up.
Yeah, this stout is definitely not the best pairing for this cigar for sure.
Yeah, my KBS is incredibly good. It's really good. I really like it. But it does not go with this cigar at all. It just blows it out of the water. The Zafra, on the other hand, is just like, it's got that molasses kind of sweetness to it, with a little bit of those bourbon flavors, the vanilla, the creaminess, the slight spice to it, and just those those oaky notes and that smoke. I think it's by far the best pairing.
I think any rum would really work well with this cigar.
Yeah. Jeremy Miller commented, I didn't see when this popped up, but he commented 50. Oh, and he wants to know if I've had Oregon Spirit Distillers whiskey. I don't believe so. Let me look up a picture of that. Oregon Spirit. That doesn't sound familiar to me. I don't recall ever having anything from Oregon Distillers. Or Oregon Spirit, I mean.
I definitely have not.
I have never seen this. I've never seen any of these whiskeys.
Uh-oh.
Which is really surprising.
You need to get some.
Oh. No. Oh, okay. So I actually, now that I see one of their older bottlings, I don't know if it's around anymore. It's not on their website. But I have had Whippersnapper that I'm checking to see if it's something they still make. I don't think they do. I had the Whippersnapper. Yeah, they don't make that anymore. But I did have that years ago, and I hated it. It reminded me
That's a harsh word.
No, I mean, it reminded me of if you took a whiskey and mixed it 50-50 with vodka.
Ooh.
Like,
okay.
The alcohol was there, but the flavor just was not there. It had so little flavor that I was surprised that it spent any time in a barrel. But it looks like they've got some older stuff. They've got a bottled and bond whiskey. They've got straight American bourbon. They've got a bottled and bond wheat whiskey and a bottled and bond bourbon whiskey. I didn't know you could make bottled and bond that's not bourbon. But I'll have to look into that. I'm going to look into them a little bit and see if I can grab some of their stuff, because the bottles that they show on their website, unless they recently changed, I don't believe I've even seen those around.
There was speaking of which, I'm trying to think of what this was. I had a corn whiskey from, I think it was from Detroit, that I just couldn't drink. I couldn't even.
Really?
I could not get near it. It was, for me, I think it was, nope, maybe 2 James. I could be wrong. But they had like a Japanese label on it, or there was some Japanese on the label.
A Japanese label for a Detroit whiskey?
Yeah.
That seems weird.
And it was a really corn heavy whiskey. And I can't find it, but it was, I mean, not that it was horrible, but it was just, for my palate, it just didn't fit. Man, I can't find it. Who knows? But,
the world may never know.
Corn whiskeys in general, I enjoy, but in moderation.
I mean,
it has to be really something specific.
Yeah, so the problem for me is that when you have to call it corn whiskey, it's just usually not a good sign. Like, corn whiskey should just go in my opinion, from the couple of corn whiskeys that I've had, just put it in a barrel. Put it in a barrel for 10 minutes, you can call it bourbon.
Yeah. I think I found it, actually. It's called, who's it by? Oh, it is 2 James. Okay, so it's Johnny Smoking Gun.
Okay.
By 2 James from Detroit. And, I mean, cool bottle, really cool label. But it's too much corn for me. 70% 7-year corn whiskey and 30% young rye. Which, I mean, it sounds pretty good.
So it's 7% corn whiskey? I mean, so this is 75% corn. 75% of what's in the bottle used to be corn.
Totally different.
like I don't know what you could do to make it bad after it's been in the. I mean, I guess I've had bad bourbons, so.
You know what it is with this actual whiskey? They did a 2-stage maceration with Asian tea, a blend of Asian tea. They don't
Oh,
specify what.
that's weird.
And I wonder if that's what gives it that kind of weird kick.
That's very weird.
But hey, it's cheap enough. If you see it in the store, pick it up, give it a shot. You might like it.
I'll keep an eye out for it. I mean, I've had a lot of whiskeys that I don't like very much. I haven't had very many that I've hated, but Whippersnapper is one of them. All right, we have anything else to talk about, or should we close this out, Dennis?
I think we can close it out.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you to all of our live viewers for watching and commenting and thumbs upping and all those things. We appreciate you guys. Yeah, we appreciate you guys supporting us, and we'll be back tomorrow. We're gonna have Boofy on. Matt Booth decided to make a last-minute appearance, so I'm really excited to have him on. Me and Jason will be talking to him for somewhere around an hour or 3 tomorrow.
Or 3.
So tune in for that. We'll be back next week. We're planning on having. We haven't decided what we're doing for sharing our pairings, but Cigar Chat's going to be Chris Topper, who Dennis and I met in the Dominican Republic. He's a really cool guy, and he makes machine-made cigars, but they're machine-mades that are 100% Connecticut broadleaf. So, I mean...
Yep.
I mean, you can't be mad at that. Like, it's Connecticut broadleaf, man. Even if you make it in a machine, it's still going to be pretty dang good. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him, and... I mean, he's just an interesting guy who's fun to talk to, and I'm looking forward to trying some of his cigars on the show. So we'll see you guys next week. Thank you, everybody, again for watching. And remember, I almost forget to say this every time, but we want you to drink better, but we want you to drink less.